as an investigator. Hoover investigated the Nazi connections of all these people and brought actions against them. For example, Hoover investigated the Nazi connections of Union Bank of New York. And in 1942, the year the U.S. entered the war, the bank was seized as a Nazi asset. Prescott Bush, the president's grandfather, was a director and chief executive officer of that bank. And when the U.S. government grabbed the bank, he protested. He said, "Wait a minute, that's my bank." Hoover said, "That's right. No mistake. You're a Nazi. You run a Nazi bank." So Hoover knew that Prescott Bush was a Nazi. This is going to be extremely important later, so please make a note to yourself. Hoover knew that the Bushes were Nazis. But let's get back to this guy, Prescott Bush, the president's grandfather. He was a co-director of this Nazi bank with this Nazi, Averell Harriman, his boss. Prescott Bush was also a full partner in Brown Brothers Harriman. They were the closest of business associates. Remember the trial of E. Howard Hunt, where the jury found Hunt guilty of the murder of President Kennedy? During this trial, Hunt testified that immediately after World War II he was in Paris working directly for Averell Harriman, reporting directly on a daily basis to his boss. So the Bushes run around in a tight circle that includes other Nazis and Kennedy killers. A truly evil circle of friends. Of course, this doesn't prove that the Bushes killed JFK, but it ought to provoke some investigation on our part. So let's do some investigating. We just saw that in 1942, Hoover forced Prescott Bush to give up his active political support for his favorite young politician, Adolf Hitler. However, 4 short years later, he found another young man to sponsor in politics, Nixon, who is documented as employing Jack Ruby a year after this photo was taken. Nixon, who hired Hunt, who hired Connally, was created and sponsored from the very beginning by Prescott Bush. Are you surprised? Well, you better get over it in a hurry. This barely readable piece of paper was declassified by the FBI in 1977 and released. It's a memo written by J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. The title is Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It is about a meeting that took place between the FBI and the CIA the day after the assassination. The memo names George Bush as one of 2 CIA officials sent to get Hoover's report on the activities of the CIA's misguided anti-Castro Cubans. The memo was a scandal when it was made public in 1988 because it says that George Bush was in the CIA in 1963. It says that Bush lied when he told the public that he had no CIA experience before becoming director in 1974. It means he was in the CIA when he ran for Senate and lost in 1964, and when he ran for Senate and lost in 1970. And it means that he was in the CIA when Nixon brought him into the White House, trailing E. Howard Hunt behind him. In 1992, Bush was first confronted with this memo, and he had a chance to respond to it. Oh shit. Bush claimed that the memo must be talking about another George Bush working at CIA, because it couldn't be talking about him, because he had never been in the CIA. Never been there. Except for that time in 1974 when he was director of CIA. Oh shit. Should we believe him? Let's make clear what we're talking about here. The George Bush of the memo, who received the report on misguided Cubans, was clearly a supervisor of the CIA's misguided Cuban operations. We've seen both the CIA and their misguided Cubans implicated in the Kennedy assassination. This is some important stuff, eh? The George Bush of this memo is directly implicated in the assassination. It makes a huge difference whether this was him or some other George Bush. But how can we know? Well, come on, it's basic stuff. Is there any corroboration? Is there any other evidence besides this memo to show whether Bush was in the CIA at this time, or that shows whether Bush was supervising anti-Castro Cubans? We'll start by looking at Bush's connections. A quick look at Allen Dulles may help us understand the importance of connections. Dulles worked closely with Nazi bankers during World War II. That somehow qualified him to become the director of the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. He was the architect of the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. When he launched the invasion against Kennedy's orders, of course Kennedy fired him. So thinking people were shocked when he was virtually put in charge of the investigation, the Warren Commission,
because he was the prime suspect as the leader of the assassins. But he had been fired. He was no longer the head of the CIA. How could he lead anything? Because the organizing principle in secret work is that you trust only the people you know personally and are connected to personally. The CIA is not so much an organization as a community, so that it hardly mattered that Kennedy fired Dulles. The men loyal to Dulles who knew him and trusted in him continued to trust and obey. In fact, Dulles stood at the center of the group of men who not only had the motive, but the ability to steal the body from the Dallas coroner, to steal it from the Secret Service, mutilate it, and return it, all without attracting public attention. Was George Bush a member of this community in 1963, as the Hoover memo says? Well, did he have close personal ties with these people? Let's examine that question. Certainly one of Bush's main ties to this community is the connection between his father and Allen Dulles. In the 1930s and 1940s, Allen Dulles was a close business associate on a first-name basis with both Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman. Before that, during World War I, before there was a CIA, Prescott worked for Army Intelligence, a forerunner and parallel organization to the CIA. Through his closest associate, Averell Harriman, Prescott is also tied to Richard Bissell, the CIA Director of Operations for the Bay of Pigs, who was fired by Kennedy. Bissell, like Hunt, also worked for Averell Harriman for 10 years before joining the CIA. Prescott also partnered with William J. Casey, Director of CIA under Reagan, in 1962. At the time, Kennedy was moving to dismantle the CIA. Prescott and Casey together founded the National Strategy Information Center to directly fight against Kennedy's efforts. But at the center of Bush's connections in the world of secret murder and filth is his membership in the secret society of Skull and Bones, a secret Yale fraternity famous for its celebration of racism, robbery, and death. This tomb is where they meet twice a week to engage in black rituals using skulls, candles, and ceremonial group masturbation. It's supposed to be kind of a gay group marriage thing. Brothers under the skin is how the Bonesmen describe their relationship. Their graduates are a powerful bunch of devils. Averell Harriman and Prescott Bush were Bonesmen. George Herbert Walker Bush was a Bonesman, and so was his uncle, George Herbert Walker. Robert Lovett, architect of the CIA, was a Bonesman, selected for membership by Prescott himself. F. Truby Davison was also selected for membership in Skull and Bones in 1918, the year Prescott did the picking. Davison was in charge of hiring for the CIA in 1948, the year George Herbert Walker Bush left Yale in search of a job. Davison had a son, Endicott Peabody Davison. Endicott was Skull and Bones, class of '48, making him brother under the skin with George Herbert Walker Bush. He's also the Bush family lawyer. As both former president and director of CIA, old Beelzebub himself, George Herbert Walker Bush is the most distinguished of modern Bonesmen. But the question is whether he was in the CIA in 1963, as Hoover says. In a world where personal connection is everything, no one could possibly have a closer relationship to the head of hiring for CIA than George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush's first job on leaving Skull and Bones was to work for Neil Mallon, brother under the skin to Prescott, class of '18. In a letter to White House aide C.D. Jackson, dated March 26, 1953, the now Senator Prescott Bush described Neil Mallon as a very old and dear friend. I might say that Neil Mallon is well known to Allen Dulles and has tried to be helpful to him in the CIA, especially in the procurement of individuals to serve in that important agency. So George went directly from Skull and Bones. He went directly from being a brother under the skin to the son of the director of hiring for CIA to working for a recruiter for the CIA. You could not ask for more powerful evidence that Bush was in the CIA when Hoover said he was. But you can get it. This letter records a meeting between Prescott Bush, George's CIA-promoting father, Neil Mallon, the CIA recruiter, and Allen Dulles, the head of CIA, to discuss, quote, our pilot project in the Caribbean, unquote. In 1959, the year that Allen Dulles began planning the CIA invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs,
Bush began his independent business career as the sole owner of Zapata Offshore Oil. Zapata Offshore's oil rigs just happened to be positioned right in the middle of CIA operations in the area 30 miles north of Cuba near Cay Sal, an island used by the CIA for supplying the various terrorist raids of Operation 40, Operation Mongoose, Alpha 66, and the rest of these murders against Cuba. The assassins of Operation 40 were supervised by E. Howard Hunt. Hunt was also